Fear networks feature human legends because our monsters are worst. Part 1. Doctor had been living on the Convergence Station for 3 months when she discovered that humans were famous across 47 dimensions, not for their technology, their art, or their diplomacy. They were famous for their monsters. The discovery happened by accident. She had been walking through the entertainment district, past holographic advertisements in languages her translator couldn't quite parse, when she noticed a crowd gathered around a viewing portal. The beings pressed against the barrier were crystalline creatures that looked like walking chandeliers made of purple glass. Their internal light flickered in patterns had learned to recognize as excitement. Curiosity pulled her closer. The viewing portal displayed a scene she recognized immediately. A dark house. A young woman climbing stairs with a flashlight. The creak of old wood. The music building to something terrible. It was a horror movie from Earth, an old one from at least 50 years ago. Watching the screen. Their crystalline bodies trembled. The lights inside them pulsed erratically. One of them made a sound like wind chimes crashing to the floor. When the monster appeared on screen, 3 actually shattered their outer layers in what realized was the equivalent of fainting. Station medical drones rushed to help them. The other didn't even notice. They couldn't look away from the screen. Stood there confused. The movie wasn't even that scary. She had watched it when she was 12 and slept fine afterward. But these aliens were having physical reactions to it like humans might have to actual danger. When the movie ended, they dispersed slowly, helping their shattered friends toward the medical bay. One of them noticed and approached. The translator on its wrist converted the harmonic chimes into words. "You are human," they said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm Doctor. I'm the cultural liaison from Earth." This internal light dimmed to something like respect or fear. Couldn't tell the difference yet. "I am Harmonic of distant storms. You may call me Harmonic. Tell me, Doctor, is it true that human children consume such content?" Blinked. "Horror movies. Sure, some do, usually when they're teenagers." Harmonic's light flickered in a way that made think of someone taking a sharp breath. "And they survive the experience." "Of course they survive. It's just entertainment." The word didn't translate well. Harmonic tilted its crystalline head. Entertainment, a recreational activity, something consumed for pleasure. Exactly. Harmonic was quiet for a long moment. Then it said, "Doctor, the content you just witnessed is classified on the Dreadstreams as a Class 7 existential threat simulation. It carries viewer warnings in 32 languages. 3 species have filed formal complaints that it should be banned entirely. And you are telling me that human juveniles watch this for pleasure." Felt something cold settle in her stomach. The Dreadstreams. "Come," Harmonic said. "I think you need to see something." The Dreadstreams occupied an entire section of the station that had never visited. The halls here were darker, the lighting kept deliberately low. Harmonic explained that most species experienced fear as a visual phenomenon, so the content providers maintained an atmosphere that enhanced the experience. "Think of it like your theme parks," Harmonic said, "but for controlled exposure to mortality contemplation." They entered a vast chamber filled with viewing booths. Thousands of them, each occupied by different species watching different screens. Saw tentacled beings, floating geometric shapes, creatures made of living shadow. All of them were consuming content that made them experience fear. "Every spacefaring species develops fear entertainment eventually," Harmonic explained. "It serves an evolutionary purpose. It allows us to practice responding to danger in a safe environment. But the content varies wildly in intensity based on each species' threat threshold." Harmonic led to a central display that showed rankings. The top-rated content by lethality index and existential threat level. The top 100 slots were all human productions. Stared at the list. She recognized some of the titles. Classic horror movies, yes, but also television shows. novels, video games, even some children's stories that she remembered from her own youth. "This can't be right," she said. "These are just stories." "Are they?" Harmonic's light pulsed with something that might have been amusement. "Doctor, do you know what the average lethality index is for content that my species produces?" Shook her head. Point 3. Meaning that the threats depicted in our horror content have a 3% chance of causing actual death if encountered in reality. It is considered quite extreme by our standards. We have psychologists who help viewers process the experience afterward. Harmonic gestured at the screen. "That movie we just watched, the one you say human children consume, it has a lethality index of 8.7. The threats depicted would kill 87% of beings who encountered them." "But they're not real," said Weekly. "Aren't they?" Harmonic pulled up a file, saw images of creatures that looked disturbingly similar to the monster from the movie. "This is a harvester, native to the sixth dimension. It hunts in darkness and feeds on neurological tissue. When our expeditionary force encountered one, 40% of our team died before we could retreat. The rest required psychological reconditioning for 3 cycles." Felt her mouth go dry. "You're saying that thing is real?" "Not exactly, but close enough that your species somehow predicted it. Close enough that we now use human horror content to train our deep space teams." Harmonic paused. "Doctor, do you want to know what the highest rated content on the Dread streams is?" Wasn't sure she did, but she nodded anyway. Harmonic pulled up a title, recognized it immediately. A novel written 200 years ago by a human author. A story about a creature from beyond space and time that drove people insane just by existing near them. "Lethality Index 9.9, Harmonic said quietly. "The highest rating we can measure. And do you know why it ranks so high?" "Why?" "Because 7 years ago, we encountered something in deep space that matched the description almost perfectly. It killed an entire research station. 3,000 beings dead. And the only reason anyone survived at all was because a human engineer was on the station." She recognized the threat from this story. She knew the protocols because she had read the book when she was 15 years old. She saved 200 lives by knowing that you don't look at it directly, you don't try to communicate with it, and you run. Felt dizzy, she leaned against the wall. "That's impossible, that was just a story, the author made it up." "Did he?" Harmonic's light dimmed. "Doctor, I need to show you something else. But I warn you, it is classified information. I am only cleared to share it with you because you are humanity's representative here. What I am about to reveal may change how you see your own species." They took a transport to the restricted archives, deep in the station's core. Harmonic used several security clearances to get them through. Finally, they stood in a small room with a single terminal. "This is the Convergence Archive," Harmonic said. "It contains records of every documented encounter with dangerous entities across all known dimensions. Watch." Harmonic pulled up a search function and entered a single word: human. The screen filled with results, thousands of them, leaned forward and started reading. Every monster from human mythology was there. Dragons, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, demons. Every creature that humans had feared and fought in legend and story had a corresponding entry in the archive. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was that every single entry had a note attached: encountered and repelled by indigenous human population. Date: various, ranging from 10,000 BCE to present. Dimensional breach sealed by unknown human methodology. His hand shook as she scrolled through the records. "What is this? What are you saying?" "I am saying," Harmonic replied, "that your planet has been experiencing dimensional incursions for your entire history, that everything you call mythology was real, and that somehow, without technology or dimensional science, your ancestors fought them off and survived." Pulled up another file. This one showed a creature that looked like something from a Japanese horror film. A pale woman with long black hair covering her face, moving in ways that physics. Classification, the file read. Dimensional parasite that feeds on guilt and manifests through reflective surfaces. 16 confirmed encounters across multiple dimensions. Fatality rate, 94%. Exception, Earth. Human population developed cultural countermeasures. Entity unable to maintain cohesion when confronted by human psychological resilience. Recommend avoiding this dimension entirely. Recommend avoiding this dimension, repeated, Earth. Yes, Harmonic said. Doctor, do you understand what I am telling you? Your planet wasn't isolated because it was protected. It was isolated because it was too dangerous. Because something about Earth, about humanity's evolutionary path, made it the one place in the multiverse where the monsters lost. Sat down heavily. Her mind was racing through everything she knew about human history. The stories, the myths, the legends, all of it real, all of it survived. But why, she asked, why are we different? We don't know, Harmonic admitted. That is what terrifies us. Some species theorize that Earth's evolutionary pressures were uniquely hostile. Others believe humans possess some kind of natural dimensional resistance. But the truth is, we simply don't understand why you can look at existential horrors and decide they make good bedtime stories for your children. Laughed. It came out slightly hysterical. You're telling me that humans are famous across the multiverse because our monsters are the worst ones. No, Harmonic said gently. You are famous because you are the only species that survived your monsters. Every other world that experienced even a fraction of what Earth endured went extinct. But humans didn't. Humans adapted. Humans turned their nightmares into entertainment. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Harmonic added, there is one more thing you should know. There is a growing movement among some species to quarantine Earth. Permanently. They argue that any species with such a casual relationship with existential horror is too dangerous to integrate into the greater community. What? Felt a surge of anger. That's insane. We're not dangerous. We're victims who survived. Are you? Harmonic's light pulsed with something unreadable. Doctor, you create content that gives nightmares to species that have never known fear before. You survived threats that killed entire civilizations. And you did it so thoroughly that you turned the memory of those threats into children's stories. Harmonic paused. Tell me, Doctor, if you can survive the monsters, if you can domesticate the things that should not be, what does that make you? Opened her mouth to answer but found she had no words, because she was starting to understand what Harmonic was really asking. If humans could survive the monsters, then maybe humans were the monsters. And maybe the rest of the universe was just starting to figure that out. Part 2. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of life. She couldn't stop thinking about what Harmonic had shown her. Every time she walked through the convergence station, she saw evidence of it everywhere. Aliens watching human movies with the intensity of soldiers studying combat footage. Shops selling human horror novels with warning labels in 6 languages. Even the children's section had human fairy tales marked with age restrictions. She started doing her own research. Late at night in her quarters, she pulled up Earth's history and compared it to the files in the Convergence archive. The correlations were impossible to ignore. Every major historical period of human superstition and monster legends matched a spike in dimensional instability. The witch trials of the 1600s corresponded with an outbreak of entities that possessed human bodies. The vampire panics of the 1700s matched of a parasitic species that fed on blood to maintain physical form. The ghost stories that exploded in the Victorian era lined up perfectly with a documented increase in dimensional echoes. Humanity hadn't been making up stories. Humanity had been keeping records. Requested a leave from her diplomatic duties. She told the station administrator that she needed to return to Earth for personal reasons. In reality, She needed answers, and there was only one place to get them. She landed in Seattle on a gray morning in October. The rain matched her mood perfectly. She caught a transport to the university where Dr. Sarah worked, was one of Earth's leading evolutionary biologists, and more importantly, she was one of the few people on Earth who knew about the convergence and humanity's place in the larger multiverse. His office was cluttered with bones, DNA samples, and ancient texts. The professor herself was a tall woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. She looked up when knocked. "Doctor," said warmly, "back from the stars already. I thought you were supposed to be our liaison for at least another year." "I need to ask you something," said without preamble, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." Gestured to a chair. "That sounds ominous. What's going on?" Sat down and pulled up her tablet. She showed the files from the Convergence archive, the dimensional incursions, the monster classifications, the notes about human survival. His expression grew more serious with every image. When finished, the professor sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "I was wondering when someone would notice," finally said. "You knew," felt a spike of betrayal. "You knew this whole time and didn't tell anyone." "I suspected," corrected. "There's a difference. But yes, a small group of us have been studying this for years. Ever since first contact, we've been trying to understand why humanity seems to have such an unusually high tolerance for existential threats." She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the rain. "Tell me, what do you know about Earth's evolutionary history?" "The basics. Millions of years of evolution, survival of the fittest, natural selection." "Right, but do you know how unusual our evolutionary path was?" Turned back to face her. "Earth has had 5 major mass extinction events, 5 times that 90% of all life on this planet died, and that's not counting the thousands of smaller disasters, ice ages, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, pandemics." She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's timeline. Most planets that develop intelligent life do so during periods of relative stability, long, peaceful eras where evolution can proceed gradually. Earth never had that. Every step of human evolution was forged in crisis. Zoomed in on the section showing human development. Our ancestors didn't just have to survive predators, they had to survive everything. Megafauna that could crush them, diseases that killed half a population, climate shifts that destroyed entire ecosystems. For millions of years, humans lived on the knife's edge between survival and extinction. "And that made us different," said slowly. "It made us adaptable. More than that, it made us paranoid," smiled grimly. "Human beings are pattern recognition machines. We see threats everywhere because for most of our history, threats were everywhere. We evolved to imagine the worst possible scenario because that's what kept us alive." She pulled up another image, this one showing human brain structure. "This is the amygdala, the fear center of the brain. In humans, it's proportionally larger than in any other species we've encountered. We're literally built to be more afraid than everyone else. But here's the interesting part." Highlighted another region. "This is the prefrontal cortex, the planning and problem-solving center. In humans, it's also unusually large. So we're not just more afraid than other species. We're also better at doing something about it. We imagine the threat, and then we figure out how to kill it," said. "Exactly. That's why we survived the dimensional incursions. When monsters started appearing, humans didn't freeze. We didn't retreat. We studied them. We found their weaknesses. We developed countermeasures. And then we passed that knowledge down through stories." Pulled up images of ancient cave paintings, creatures that didn't match any known Earth animal. "These aren't mythical beings. They're field notes. Our ancestors were documenting the threats they faced so that future generations would know how to fight them." Looked at the paintings and felt a chill. A creature with too many limbs, something that was part human and part something else, a shadow with eyes. Mythology isn't fantasy, continued. It's a survival manual. Every story about slaying dragons or banishing demons or surviving the night is a lesson in how to fight things that shouldn't exist. And because we've been doing it for thousands of years, it's become part of our culture, part of who we are. That's why we make horror movies, said Understanding Dawning. It's not entertainment, it's training. It started as training, agreed. But over time, as the dimensional incursions decreased, we forgot that's what it was. The stories became legends. The legends became myths. The myths became fiction. But the instinct remained. We still create horror content because somewhere deep in our genetic memory, we know it keeps us prepared. Thought about the watching that old horror movie, the way they had trembled and shattered. But other species didn't evolve this way. No, from what we've been able to determine, most intelligent species evolved in much more stable environments. They developed fear responses appropriate to their local threats. But Earth shook her head. Earth was a proving ground. Everything here was trying to kill everything else. So humans learned to fear everything and prepare for anything. And now the other species are scared of us, said quietly. Can you blame them? Asked. Imagine meeting a species that treats cosmic horrors like entertainment. That survived threats which killed entire civilizations and then turned those threats into bedtime stories. From their perspective, we're either incredibly lucky or incredibly dangerous. Or both, said. Or both, agreed. They talked for hours, showed decades of research, studies on human fear responses compared to alien species, analysis of human horror content and its correlation to documented dimensional threats, evolutionary models showing how Earth's hostile environment had shaped human psychology. One file in particular caught attention. It was a study of human children's literature. I don't understand, said, reading through it. Why are so many children's stories about scary things? Wolves eating grandmothers, witches eating children, monsters under the bed. Because we wanted our children to survive, said simply. Think about it. What's the evolutionary advantage of scaring your offspring? Thought about it, teaching them to recognize danger. Exactly. Human children who learned to fear the right things were more likely to survive to adulthood, so we told them stories about the dangers they might face. But we couldn't just say watch out for predators. We had to make it memorable. We had to make it stick, so we made it scary. Pulled up a classic fairy tale. Little Red Riding Hood isn't about a wolf. It's about stranger danger. Don't talk to people you don't know. Don't reveal information about where you live or where you're going. Stay on the path. The wolf is just a metaphor for all the things that might hurt you. But we made it literal, said. We made the wolf real and gave it teeth and showed it eating the grandmother. Because that's how you make a 5-year-old understand that the threat is real. You can't explain abstract danger to a child, but you can show them a monster. And once they understand that monsters exist, they learn to watch for them. Felt sick, we traumatize our children on purpose. We prepare them, corrected gently. There's a difference. Yes, we expose them to frightening concepts at a young age, but we do it in a controlled environment, with the lights on, with a parent nearby to comfort them. It's graduated exposure therapy built into our culture. She paused. And it works. Human children who grow up with scary stories develop better threat assessment skills. They're more cautious in dangerous situations. They're better at distinguishing between real threats and false alarms. Those skills kept our species alive. But at what cost? Asked. Was quiet for a moment. Then she said, every survival adaptation has a cost. We're more anxious than other species, more paranoid. We see threats that don't exist. We have nightmares that other species can't even imagine. But we also survive things that kill everyone else. She looked directly at. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you think that's a fair trade. And more importantly, what you're going to tell the other species when they ask the same question. Left's office with more questions than answers. She spent the next week traveling across Earth, interviewing people who worked in horror entertainment, movie directors, novelists, video game designers, people who made nightmares for a living. She expected them to be dark, troubled people. Instead, she found that most of them were perfectly normal, happy, even. They talked about their work with enthusiasm and creativity. A horror novelist in London told her, "I write scary stories because they help people feel brave. When you read about someone facing a monster and winning, it reminds you that monsters can be beaten." A film director in Mumbai said, "Horror movies are about control. In real life, bad things happen randomly. But in a movie, there are rules. If you're smart and careful, you can survive. It's empowering." A game designer in Tokyo explained, "We create scenarios where players face impossible odds and find a way through. It teaches problem solving under pressure. It teaches you not to give up even when you're terrified." They all said variations of the same thing. Horror wasn't about fear. It was about overcoming fear. It was about learning that even the worst nightmares could be survived if you kept your head and fought back. It was the most human thing in the world. On her last day on Earth, visited a bookstore. She walked through the children's section, looking at the bright covers with their cheerful illustrations. But now she could see what she had missed before: the shadows in the corners, the hints of teeth, the suggestions of danger. Every story was a warning. Every character was a lesson. Red Riding Hood taught caution. Hansel and taught resourcefulness. The Three Little Pigs taught preparation. Even the gentlest stories had an edge to them, a reminder that the world could be dangerous and children needed to be ready. She picked up a copy of Where the Wild Things Are and flipped through it. A boy dealing with his anger by imagining himself as the king of monsters, processing difficult emotions by giving them form and then conquering them. Bought the book. She wasn't sure why. Maybe to remind herself of what humanity was. Maybe to show the aliens what they were so afraid of. As she left the bookstore, her communicator chimed. It was a message from Harmonic. "Doctor, you need to return to the station immediately. The conclave has been called. They're voting on whether to quarantine Earth. You have 3 days." Looked down at the children's book in her hands. Then she looked up at the city around her. Millions of humans going about their lives, completely unaware that the rest of the universe was terrified of them. She thought about's question. Was it a fair trade? The anxiety, the paranoia, the constant preparation for threats that might never come, in exchange for the ability to survive anything. Didn't know, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let humanity be punished for being too good at staying alive. Part 3. The Grand Conclave met in the oldest section of the Convergence Station, in a chamber that predated most of the species attending it. The room was vast and circular, with seats arranged in ascending tiers so that every delegate could see every other delegate. It was designed to promote equality and transparency. Right now, it just made feel very small and very alone. She stood in the center of the chamber, representing all of humanity. Around her, delegates from 47 different species watched and waited. Some of them looked curious. Others looked wary. A few looked openly hostile. The Arbiter, an ancient being that resembled a floating mass of golden light, spoke first. Its voice bypassed the translators entirely, understood by all. "We are gathered to address the question of humanity, specifically whether the species poses a threat to the stability and mental of the galactic community. Doctor, you stand as their representative. What do you say in their defense?" Took a breath. She had prepared a speech. 3 days of work consulting with experts, crafting arguments. But now, standing here, the words felt hollow. So she told the truth instead. "Humanity is terrifying," she said. The chamber went completely silent. "I've spent the last month learning just how terrifying we are. We create content that traumatizes species who have never known real fear. We survived dimensional incursions that killed entire civilizations. We turned our worst nightmares into entertainment for children. And we did all of it without even realizing how unusual it was. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. But you need to understand why. You need to understand what made us this way. She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth. This is my planet. From space, it looks beautiful, peaceful. But Earth has been trying to kill everything that lives on it for 4 billion years. Mass extinctions, ice ages, plagues, predators at every level of the food chain. My ancestors didn't just have to survive other animals. They had to survive the planet itself. The display changed, showing human evolution. We evolved in crisis. Every single step of our development happened while we were on the edge of extinction. So we developed something that most species don't have, an imagination that constantly shows us the worst possible outcome, a brain that never stops preparing for threats. A delegate from the spoke up. It was harmonic. But that is precisely why we are concerned, Doctor. A species that sees threats everywhere is a species that might decide to strike first. A species that prepares for the worst might become the worst. We could, admitted. We could become the monsters we've been fighting. That's the risk. But there's another possibility you're not considering. She changed the display again, showing the files from the Convergence archive. These are the threats that Earth has faced. Dimensional horrors, cosmic predators, things that should have wiped us out 100 times over, but they didn't. We survived. And more importantly, we learned. Every monster we faced taught us something. Every horror we survived became a story, and every story became a weapon. Pulled up a file showing a recent dimensional incursion, a creature that had breached into a mining colony on the outer rim. This happened 6 months ago, a Class 8 entity. It killed 73 miners before the station went dark. When the rescue team arrived, they expected to find everyone dead. The display showed the aftermath. Instead, they found one survivor, a human engineer named Maria. She had survived for 4 days in a dark station with a creature that could phase through walls and feed on fear. Do you know how she did it? Pulled up Maria's statement. She recognized it. From a movie she'd watched when she was 16. She knew that it hunted by sensing fear responses, so she meditated. She controlled her breathing. She kept her fear down to levels it couldn't detect, and when it came close enough, she lured it into an airlock and vented it into space. The chamber was silent, continued. Maria saved herself using tactics from a horror movie, a story designed to scare teenagers. And when we interviewed her afterward, do you know what she said? She said, "I'd seen this before. I knew what to do." Another delegate spoke up. This one was a species that resembled a cluster of floating coral. But this only proves our point. Humans are dangerous because they know how to fight things that terrify us. What happens when humans decide we are the threat? "Then you should have killed us already," said bluntly. The chamber erupted in shocked sounds from multiple species, raised her voice. "I'm serious. If you think humanity is going to become a threat, then you should quarantine us now. Lock us away where we can't hurt anyone. Because if we do become dangerous, you won't get a second chance." She let that sink in. But if you do that, you're making the same mistake that every monster in our stories makes. You're assuming that the scary thing is always evil, that the creature with teeth and claws must be the villain. Change the display one more time. This time it showed children, human children from across Earth, reading books and watching movies and telling each other scary stories. These are human children. They're learning to be afraid, but more importantly, they're learning to be brave. They're learning that when you face something terrible, you don't give up. You don't run. You find its weakness and you fight back. She looked at the Arbiter. Humanity isn't the monster in this story. We're the survivors. We're the ones who looked at the darkness and learned to see in it. And yes, that makes us scary, but it also makes us exactly what the universe needs. "And what is that?" the Arbiter asked. Before could answer, the station's alarm began to blare. The chamber dissolved into chaos. Delegates were shouting in dozens of languages. Station security was trying to coordinate, and through it all, the alarm kept wailing. The arbiter's voice cut through the noise. "Report." A station officer appeared on the main display. They were Kelvin, a species with 4 arms and compound eyes, and they looked terrified. "Sir, we have a breach. Dimensional instability in Sector 7. Something is coming through." "What kind of something?" the arbiter demanded. "Unknown, but the readings match a Class 10 entity, maybe higher." The chamber went silent. Class 10 meant extinction-level threat. It meant something that could destroy entire species. "Evacuate the sector," the arbiter ordered. "Seal all emergency bulkheads. Prepare for." "Sir, it's already through, and it's heading toward the conclave chamber." Felt ice in her veins. She looked around and saw the same fear reflected in every delegate's face. These were species from across the multiverse, beings with technology and power beyond Earth's wildest dreams. And they were all frozen in terror. All except the humans. There were 5 humans in the chamber besides, 2 security officers, a junior diplomat, a translator, and a maintenance worker who had been fixing a panel when the alarm went off. As the alien delegates panicked, the 5 humans moved. The security officers immediately began herding delegates toward emergency exits. The diplomat started coordinating with station security, her voice calm and clear despite the chaos. The translator switched to emergency protocols, providing real-time updates in multiple languages. And the maintenance worker, a young man named James, looked at and asked the most human question possible. "What are we dealing with?" Pulled up the readings on her tablet. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. She recognized this feeling. It was the same thing she felt watching horror movies. The same thing Maria must have felt in that dark station. It was fear, but it was also focus. "Dimensional entity," she said. "Unknown classification, probably hostile." "Weaknesses?" James asked. "Unknown." "Great, so we're improvising." James looked at the security officers. "You two, get everyone out. Diplomat, coordinate the evacuation. Translator, make sure they understand not to look at it directly if it shows up." "How do you know not to look at it?" Harmonic asked, still in the chamber. "Because that's Rule 1, James said. Never look directly at things from outside reality. They hate that." "That is not a real rule," one of the delegates protested. "It is in every horror story humans have ever written," said, which means somewhere at some point it was true. The door to the chamber buckled. Something was pushing through. Could see the metal warping, reality bending around whatever was on the other side. "Everyone out," the security officer shouted. "Now." The delegates fled. Harmonic grabbed arm. "You must leave too. This is not your fight." "Yes, it is," said. She pulled free and looked at James. "What do we do?" "Same thing we always do," James said. He was pulling equipment from his maintenance kit. "We figure out what it wants and we give it the opposite." The door exploded inward. Through the gap came something that hurt to look at. It was too many colors and not enough shape. It was there and not there. It was everything nightmares were made of. Half the remaining delegates collapsed immediately. Their minds simply couldn't process what they were seeing. The others ran, screaming. The 5 humans stood their ground. "Okay," James said, his voice surprisingly steady. "That's new." The thing moved into the chamber. It didn't walk. It didn't float. It simply existed in the center of the room when a moment before it had been at the door. Reality rippled around it. Felt her mind trying to shut down. Every instinct she had was,